Welcome to the first official episode of Tea Time at Physics with the brand new logo.
Yay!
And joining us today, we have Kathryn Stockmon, a registered dietitian for sports and performance. Very happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, we have so many of our clients always asking, hey, do you know a dietitian? Do you know a nutritionist? And you know what, that's just not a realm that we venture into because we focus on one thing.
Yeah.
And we've just been asking a bunch of people, asked our friends from Human Powered Health, and we love them. We do all their tests, and we're like, who do you recommend for someone who I can talk to? And they're like, you got to talk to Kathryn. And when we met, and you were here for the Lunar New Year event as well, and then now we have you on the podcast.
Yes, no,
Okay.
It's exciting. And I think it's good to be a little picky about people like dietitians because we come from like all different backgrounds and people have different philosophies of how they practice too. So kind of like with probably a PT or a therapist or a doctor, it's good to find a good fit. So there's a range of us, but I'm glad you found me.
Absolutely, and we're gonna get into the nitty gritty. But first, so the tea, these cups actually have their own, I know.
Oh, I love that.
It is my favorite thing. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, do you have any of the matcha over on Sunday?
I didn't have matcha, but I had it was like a peach tea, I think.
The tea was actually phenomenal.
Yeah.
I like the tea a lot. We had like a pop-up tea shop
Yes.
open up right there.
Oh my
I think that
God.
was my favorite part.
Yeah. The matcha dessert was so good, whatever it was. Matcha's tough though, because it's really caffeinated, so I have to be careful.
Oh yeah.
It can hit you.
Oh yeah. It's funny because I was talking to the owner over there, and she was drinking Starbucks, and I was like, I'm like, what's going on right here? So no, the matcha don't work anymore. So I guess you can build a tolerance to something like that.
Oh yeah.
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 Food is just so interesting and all that. Now, if you don't mind letting our audience know, how'd you get into, to be a registered dietitian? Like, was that something you're always interested in, and what brought you to the sports and performance side of it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's kind of been a long road, but I started off in college pre-med because I went on a school field trip to a cancer hospital in Connecticut where I'm from. And I just loved like the atmosphere there. Being in the hospital was so just like energizing, and learning about how you can affect people's outcomes with, at that point it was medicine that I was interested in, but just learning about biology was really cool. So I started college pre-med, randomly took a nutrition class because I had looked up actually my senior year of high school, like the food pyramid it was back then. And I started implementing some things. That was really the first time I even thought twice about what I put in my body. And I noticed some changes. I just felt better switching to whole grains, for example. And there were some foods that I never considered eating because my family kind of had a very, typical diet. We didn't vary too much from it. So anyways, that was the first kind of foray into realizing that nutrition was somewhat interesting. And then as part of my undergrad, I took a nutrition 101 class and just was shocked at how much what we eat and drink affects what goes on inside the body. And so after learning a little bit more about that, I was like, I want to use my field to help people prevent the illnesses that are being treated rather than, to me, it was, more fulfilling than focusing on treating the illnesses when they're already there. So that was really when I decided, and it just so happened I went to the University of Connecticut, and they just happened to have a very specific program there that dietitians have to complete in order to become an RD. So I did it and loved it. I started off very clinical. We get placed kind of like how physicians get placed for residency. You get just matched to some random place. You list out which ones you like, and then they match you based on who accepts you. It's the same thing for dietitians. So I applied to all different places and got matched in Boston at Tufts Medical Center, and the School of Medicine has a nutrition school as well. So that's what brought me to Boston. Loved the clinical side. Like I did a lot of hospital work, which was still like really exciting for me, and I learned so much.
Yeah, when you say the clinical side, are you talking about like, people who have certain types of illness, and then they have to change their diet to make sure that, they recover well? Is that what you mean by the
Yes,
clinical side?
exactly. So there's a lot of ways you can look at clinical nutrition. Like for example, working with athletes, a lot of what I do is clinical because there's a problem, we work on a solution and kind of fix it. But medically, yes. So like when you're working in a hospital setting, a lot of what you see is people who are admitted to the hospital with malnutrition a lot of the time. So typically like severe illnesses, people will be very hypermetabolic, meaning they burn a lot more calories just to fight off whatever's going on, or to deal with burns or really severe fevers or things like that. So people's nutritional needs change depending on what kind of illness or state that they're in. So yeah, clinically, like what I would do is we work with the doctors, the nurses, the nurse practitioners, everyone in the hospital to come up with a plan depending on the population. So just like how hospitals have different floors, like an ICU and a cardiology floor and a surgical floor, there's different populations of people that you'd have to work with. What I loved doing the most was tube feeding and IV nutrition called parenteral nutrition, which is so not where I am right now because it's funny.
I don't think that's what you're doing anymore.
Not at all. No, I still do a little bit of work in it, but it connects in some way. So basically when people I worked in pediatrics, so I was seeing a lot of children who were like born with certain illnesses that made it hard for them to take in enough breast milk or formula to grow appropriately. Or towards the end of my time in the hospitals, I worked in the cardiac ICU, which is where a lot of times infants are born with congenital heart defects, or older kids have exacerbations of that. And so when their heart isn't pumping blood effectively to the rest of their organs, including their digestive system, they have a really hard time, if not it being really unsafe for them to eat food.
Wow, just such a range of experience. So tell me about like after school and all of that, and how did you, started your own practice, and how do you end up serving the population that you're serving now?
Yeah, so I was always really interested in sports and performance nutrition, really since I was an athlete myself growing up.
What'd you play?
I played soccer, basketball, and tennis.
Okay.
So it was kind of like a year-round thing. I also danced, not competitively, but for fun. I did Irish dancing and ballet growing up. So anyways, I had no idea the whole time I was like a competitive athlete that what I ate had any influence on how I would do on the fields or on the court. And I struggled with that. Like I think a lot of the time I was really fatigued. I dealt with some low blood sugar issues playing soccer. I remember specifically, I went to the doctor and they gave me glucose tabs, like sugar to take in the middle of games if I was feeling shaky. But no one ever said like, hey, if you just eat a good meal before your game, you'll feel a lot better. Or if you eat more carbs on a regular basis, this won't happen. And so once I started learning about that, which was honestly when I moved to outpatient nutrition, so more on the counseling side where we meet for an hour, talk about things, come up with a plan, and not as ill people as I was working with before, I met with this one lacrosse player. He was a high school lacrosse player, and he had a really hard time maintaining his weight. His goal was to gain muscle, as a lot of teenage boys are trying to do. And he was taking advice from bodybuilding.com and
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have been there, and I have myself too before I knew what the heck I was doing. But anyways, once we were working together, I realized how much better he was performing in lacrosse, how much stronger he was getting. He was lifting more easily just by eating more consistently and increasing his carbs and timing the protein. And so at that point I was like, I need to do this. This is so important, and I wish I had that growing up. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I love that. Now, besides sports nutrition, this is more of a selfish question because I'm asking for those people that I know like people who have GI issues, like irritable bowel issues, and just like bloating. Because
Yeah.
in my population of people, this is what I find is that people who have issues with the digestion system, we find that it's really hard for those same people to find access to their deep core muscles.
Really?
Oh yeah, and
That's so interesting.
when they breathe, they are not able to control the pressure in their abdominal, and then a lot of the pressure gets pushed out, and they almost have this gut that squeezes out of their body, which is not really what you want to happen. Like you want to exhale and actually see your belly button go in towards you to really access those muscles. And many times I would ask, "Do you have digestive issues?" Oh yeah, I got digestive issues all the time. Like, and I'm seeing this very transparent and across the board
Yeah.
for not just a lot of more females, but even for males too. So tell me, do you work with those populations? And like, tell me, like, what do you do for something like that?
Yeah, I work with those populations and I am a part of that population. So a lot of what I've learned like initially was dealing with my own IBS symptoms and stuff, but quickly you realize that there's a lot of information out there. The problem is that the research is kind of ongoing and the gut is such a complex system to study. But it's interesting with like being able to coordinate like deep core movements and the association with like the IBS symptoms, because IBS is characterized by what's called visceral hypersensitivity. And so really what that is you're feeling more of what's going on internally, whether it's pressure on your intestines, where people describe that as bloating or pain even. And it gets a lot more deep than that, but I wonder, because the gut and the brain are so intrinsically connected, like there's neurons that go directly to your whole digestive system from your brain. I wonder if there's something to do with that as far as like why that coordination is off. But they're doing a lot of research into that now and how food can impact either the signals the brain is sending to the gut to improve digestion, or if it's that food is improving your like environment in your gut, which then helps to send good signals back to your brain.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's such an intertwine between the mental, the physical, all the time. Because if you're like a stressed person, you would have issues around the gut.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
I remember when I used to get a lot more stress in certain kind of situations, like when I would have to make a speech back then, like in front of a class, my stomach would get upset, and I would never get stomach upsets, right? So that is a big trigger for
Yep.
that. Or of course, if you're eating the wrong things, that will give you some brain fog, and that also enters the equation in
Yeah.
that way. And of course, the physical activity that you do, going too hard, too soon at something, that can affect motility, or not doing anything at all, that can affect it too.
Yeah.
So when we were talking before we even got on here, you said something that about IBS is a diagnosis of exclusion. Can you tell people about that? Because that's something that I didn't even know,
Yeah.
and I think everyone should know what that means.
Yeah, definitely. I think, disclaimer, you should always talk to your doctor about this stuff, because a GI physician or a primary care doctor would have to work on making that diagnosis. So I don't want anyone to leave this and go, oh yeah, I have these symptoms, like I have IBS. The reason why it's a diagnosis of exclusion is because there's a lot of different pretty serious digestive conditions that can cause similar symptoms to what people feel when they have IBS. There's no like lab tests that we can do. So we can't just do blood work or do like a colonoscopy and look inside and say like, oh yeah, you have IBS because this is showing up. But there are other things like GI cancers and IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, which is an autoimmune situation that need to be ruled out before you come to this diagnosis of IBS. So typically what people do is they go to their primary care and they say, I've been dealing with these symptoms. There's certain like red flag symptoms that people need to watch out for. And there's a wide range of how people feel. So there's no like one list of like, these are everything you have to feel to have this condition. But basically, if you're like losing weight unintentionally, waking up overnight to move your bowels, which is not typical, having severe like vomiting or things like that with or without eating. Those are things that need to be looked at. But yes, once you get to this diagnosis of IBS, there's a lot of nutrition related things that we can do to just keep everything more calm. But just like you're saying, I think the psychological aspect of things is just as important as what we're putting into our system, what we're eating, because it all kind of works together. It's super complex. And we're still figuring that out. I think there's not a good one size fits all. Like if you're dealing with this symptom, then you eat this type of diet. It's a lot of trial and error, which is kind of what I do.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm attracted to you and your way of working, because you don't have this cookie way of looking at the problem, and that's what we try to do here. Is that we don't want to have a cookie cutter way of treating any kind of back issue or whatever. But I do think people should understand that IBS is diagnosed when they rule out all the other bad stuff. So it's not like one diagnosis you can screen in for. It's like it's whatever that's left over.
Yeah,
Correct?
And there are certain criteria that you have to meet, which are kind of escaping me right now. But basically, it depends on your symptoms. You're either constipation predominant, diarrhea predominant, a mix of both, or unspecified.
Right.
And so there's lots of different avenues you can go down regarding that, but yeah.
Right, so tell me how you would help someone with this type of condition. Like, let's say someone comes through your door and say, hey, Kathryn, I have been diagnosed with IBS, I have all this bloating, and it's really been messing me up in so many different ways. Like, how would you go about solving this complex problem?
Yeah, so we have to do a really in-depth look at what their lifestyle, their sleep, their stress, their diet looks like now, because it all depends on what's happening now. There's no like, oh, here's this, like I said, there's no like, here's this diet. Yeah, exactly. So what we would do is we would do a really thorough like medical and diet history to figure out like, what are they typically eating? What are their predominant symptoms? Is it constipation related? Is it bloating? Is it pain? What is it that's been bothering them? Because that can help to influence where we go. Figuring out what they typically eat, when, and how much each time is really important.
So a food log, they would have to do a food log.
Yeah, typically what I do is I ask people to record what they eat for like 3 days before we meet, just to kind of see. In the case of IBS and those types of symptoms, it's really great to keep a food and symptom log, because it's really hard, if not impossible, to draw conclusions of like, oh, every time I eat this, that my stomach hurts, because we have to eat so many times in a day. We have to eat so many different kinds of food. Our day, like our stress levels and things change over the course of the day, that it's really hard to say, okay, this food is what's causing this. So we look at what they're eating. Honestly, a lot of the times what I focus on first, because many people need some work in this, is eating consistently throughout the day, which can be really hard when you feel uncomfortable. Like if every time you eat, you feel bloated immediately after, or you have pain, or you have urgency, or you need to have a bathroom close by, it can be really hard to like get yourself to eat a breakfast and then stop in the middle of your workday and eat lunch. And most people tend to go hours and hours eating very little or nothing when they're awake. The problem with that is our system is a big muscle. Like your whole digestive system needs to be exercised, kind of like your arm and leg muscles and your feet muscles, in order to be working efficiently.
So you eating is like them doing exercise.
It's like training your gut.
Wow.
Yeah.
Never heard about it being put in that way, but that makes perfect sense. It's a system that needs to be trained.
Yeah, exactly.
So are you finding a lot of people who have these problems, the frequency of their feed is just not where it needs to be?
Either that, or they've already think they've figured out which foods are triggering their symptoms, and they're eating like a very limited amount of foods. We know that variety in the diet, different types of foods, different versions of the same food, for example, like whole grains, not just eating whole wheat bread, but also having something like quinoa or farro or something like that in your diet can help, because each of those foods gives you a different nutrient and different complexity. So people tend to take whole food groups out of their diet because they're like looking up online, what causes this? Or someone says, oh, I cut out gluten and I felt better. So then you think, all right, now I have to do that.
Yeah.
And then they're afraid to ever add it back in because their symptoms aren't getting better and might just be getting worse over time.
Right, they just become more restrictive over time, but not really understanding if the stuff they're restricting is actually the thing that's going to be helpful for them.
Exactly, and it can actually make symptoms worse if you don't have enough variety in your diet. You're not training your gut to accept those foods comfortably. And it can be, a lot of what I do is work with people on expanding that a little bit and trusting that they're not going to feel so much worse if we add some things back in. But that being said, there are some elimination type diets that can be done to help figure out at least which types of foods or quantities can make symptoms worse. Like the low FODMAP diet is an example of that.
When you say all this, it just brings me back to what we do in movement too. It's like, can we expand the amount of movement that you can feel safe in? Or maybe sometimes we have to restrict some of the movements. So it's kind of like we're going on a movement diet for people too in our space.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to kind of see that parallel. So with these people who have these symptoms and they're dealing with all these issues, it sounds like, I mean, to me, it sounds very, I guess diet is like tough, right? Because it's like you have to eat, and to tell someone to make these changes, it can be very overwhelming. So what do you do for these people? Like, is it just like this process they just have to kind of pummel through, or is just a way to make it so it's easier to implement?
Yeah, everyone is different. So everything, that I do depends on what a person's situation is, which foods they're comfortable with, or what they've kind of already identified might be causing symptoms. But I think I should say too that like the mental health side of this is really important because our brain is so directly connected to the gut. Probably similar in movement with you. You have to be able to deal with the stress of everyday life, but then feeling terrible all the time, worrying about which foods might upset your stomach. And so having the mental health support of a therapist or psychologist is really important in this too, which I think is very undervalued in gut health, that we need to take care of our brains during this process as well, because it can bring up a lot of things. There's a big correlation between eating disorders or disordered eating and gut issues like IBS. So we need to take care of all aspects of it. Typically what I would do for someone who's like, not in a place where they're overly restricting, we're not worried that their diet is too limited to begin with, we would talk about, I tend to focus on the low FODMAP diet as a first
What
line.
is that? I know you said that a few times. I just pretend like I know what it is.
Yeah.
But I don't. So what
I know,
is
I
it?
should have explained it. So FODMAP is an acronym. I won't go into what it stands for because all the words are really long and it doesn't matter. But it is basically a temporary, I should emphasize that, temporary exclusion diet where you take, or elimination diet, where you take out certain types of foods that are high in specific types of carbohydrates. The reason for this is because we have bacteria in your gut that are really beneficial. They're there for a reason. We have billions and billions of bacteria in your intestines that help you digest your food, create nutrients, and then absorb those nutrients. They also help to protect against like illnesses getting into your system. So they're really important, but they can get out of balance. And certain types of bacteria, what they do is when they help us digest our food, they create lots and lots of gas as a byproduct, methane or other gases. And when we have that hypersensitivity that's associated with IBS, we feel the pain and discomfort from that a lot sooner at a lot lower levels of gas production. So with the low FODMAP diet, we temporarily take out the types of carbs that are really easily digested by those bacteria to reduce the amount of gas and other things that are being produced so that we can get some relief. A lot of times people have gone months or years like never feeling like they feel back to normal, where there's no bloating, no pain, nothing else going on. So if we can get them back to that point on this temporary diet where they're feeling like, okay, I actually am in control of my symptoms, everything's good, then we start to add foods back in to help them figure out what is it. Is there a certain category or type of food or just a specific food amount that causes their symptoms? And then they have control over like, they don't have to avoid it forever, but they know like, all right, if I really want to feel my best, this is a food I should limit for now.
And can this person slowly add back those, I'd say bad food? I know that's not like a word we want to use, but you can essentially.
Bad foods for them, yeah.
Exactly. Is it possible for those people to take the food that generally is producing symptoms for them and slowly add them back into a point where they can have a good, moderate amount of it and not feel those symptoms anymore? Like, can they build a tolerance to these foods?
That's a really good question. I don't know that there's evidence to say that they definitely can. Like, I don't know if we've done a lot of research on that, or else I haven't seen it. But I do think that it is certainly likely that people are able to figure out how much of a food they tolerate without any symptoms. For example, one of the two of the foods that I find are really triggering for a lot of people are garlic and onion.
No.
Yes, which is
That's like everything.
shocking and really sad because they make everything taste good and they're in everything.
Yeah.
But when we take those out, a lot of people, they're high in a certain type of FODMAP called fructans. Doesn't matter, but there's a whole category, and garlic and onion are just in that category. So let's say, for example, someone realizes, okay, you know, onion is something that I know if I eat like a salad with chopped up fresh onion in it, I'm gonna have pretty much like bloating immediately and not feel great later. Once we figure out that that is actually a trigger for them, we can start to add it back in slowly. For example, I'll usually tell people to like make something with garlic powder instead of, or I'm sorry, onion powder instead of putting onion straight into their food, and then work up to like cooking the onion first and then using it in a dish that way versus something like a salad that's got fresh onion. Those FODMAPs are a lot higher in that food, and probably for a lot of people, we need to limit that if they're sensitive. But it is possible, yeah. And as far as the foods being bad, the frustrating part about diets for IBS and other GI symptoms is that a lot of times the foods you're cutting out temporarily or that you're, you know, limiting are not unhealthy foods, which is why it's so hard to navigate on your own, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important topic that there's no like one clear-cut way, which is pretty annoying.
It is.
But such is movement problems. That's why you can't go on the internet and look for back pain exercises and expect to have the results, because there's so many variables.
Yeah.
But another selfish question is like stool samples. I know there are functional health docs, and I've gone to understand that field a little bit more. I still don't quite understand exactly everything that they're able to do, but I find that they are helpful for certain people. And I know having stool samples and examining those are something that they do. Is that something that you also do, or do you find merit in doing things like that?
I don't do any of that actually, but a lot of GI doctors will definitely test, and primary care, like your general doctor will do a stool study basically. Most of the time what I see that used for is to rule out any sort of infection, like a bacterial infection that's causing symptoms. That's totally separate from IBS. So that's one of those things that they'd want to rule out before going on a specific diet, for example, because you want to make sure that it's not something that needs to be treated with a medication like an antibiotic.
Okay, so that's more like things to rule in or rule out some more serious pathologies.
Exactly.
Before these other criteria.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know as much about it as I would like to, and that's kind of an upcoming goal of mine, but there are a lot of stool studies that you can do to test for other things, like yeah, I can't even really explain it because I don't fully understand it myself. Yeah. But yeah, there's other things besides bacteria that can give us insight into what's going on in the gut, and finding a good GI doctor or a functional health doc that knows what they're doing with that can be really a good feature. I
feel like that can definitely be like a nice like 1-2, like you and then a functional health doc coming together.
Yeah.
For this one person can give them just sort of a more powerful set of tools to use to combat these things.
And there's actually a lot of up and coming like companies and tests that can be done that I'm not sure we're quite there yet in the research to say that they're like definitely useful or what the deal is, but they can test your stool to test like what types of bacteria you naturally have. And then we can hopefully in the future we'll be able to customize dietary recommendations for people based on what we're seeing in their actual gut versus like on a diet where you have to cut out everything and try things one at a time. So that would be great if we can get there in science.
Absolutely. Now I want to pivot around a little bit. So you say you are one of those people with IBS. So you have your own journey. So how has that journey been after? Well, of course, now after you became a dietitian, you found. Yeah, how was that journey for you?
Yeah, it was really tough because I was actually a nutrition student in undergrad when everything kind of hit me. I was studying abroad and went to Morocco, got some sort of foodborne illness there, and basically just never felt like I really recovered from that. And I like played around with my diet a little bit, fell into the rabbit hole of like, what are the foods that I should cut out? And I had cut out way too much food. That to the point where I was doing like food labs in nutrition classes. We like learned how to bake and cook different things. And you had to put on the bottom of the sheet, like if you have any food allergies or intolerances. And I listed like 20 foods. And the TA that was working the class like pulled me aside afterwards and he's like, have you like heard of any of these other like things you can try, like the diets and stuff like that? Like you should probably look into that because I don't think you should be avoiding like all of these foods. So thanks to him, I did a lot of work and research in that, saw the right doctors and specialists, and eventually kind of realized that a lot of my GI issues were more stress related, I think. Once my stress was taken care of and I was getting the right amount of sleep and I stopped worrying so much about every bite of food that I was eating and how I was going to feel afterwards, it really helped.
Right. It's almost being obsessive about the food is the very thing that's making all the symptoms come on.
Yeah, and things change over time too. So if 10 years ago I had recognized that onions, for example, were a big trigger of my symptoms, that doesn't mean that today I wouldn't be able to eat them. So I think it's important to have the right people to support you and like challenging you to keep expanding things if you can.
Right. It's like just because the food betrayed you once doesn't mean it's going to betray you again in
Yeah.
the future.
Yeah, exactly. And that relaxing around food, and I think that's what I like the most about my job, whether it's working with athletes or other people, is giving them permission to eat and like enjoy their food. Because I think as a society, we've gotten really too far away from that aspect of eating. Like we eat for so many reasons other than just calories and weight and, you know, whatever all the ingredients are and health. And we need to get back to that in order to like really feel our best, I think.
I love it. I love it. You're just full of knowledge. I can be talking to you all day. So we're going to end this real soon, but I want to ask you a couple fun questions.
Oh, yay.
What's your favorite food?
It has to be pizza. I know, very unoriginal, but
I am the same. I love pizza.
Yep.
Favorite pizza spot in Boston? Is there one?
Yes. Wait, now I'm not sure because there's a couple I like. Pico in the South End.
Pico, yeah, Pico. They have the ice cream over there too.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
The mint chocolate chip is the
I
best.
used to live around the South End, so
Yep, same.
Pico's just, oh yeah?
Yeah, I was right
South
on
End?
Clarendon Street by Copley.
Oh, I'm on Tremont.
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there all the time. That's the road that Pico's on.
Exactly, on Tremont.
I love that place.
What's your favorite guilty food?
I don't like that term.
Oh,
Guilty food.
I should have known.
Most people would probably say pizza, right? Like if we're
Okay.
thinking about like healthy
How
or
about
unhealthy
like sweets?
food.
Do you like sweets?
I love sweets.
What's your favorite chocolate?
Is probably my second favorite food total. Like
Okay.
out of everything.
What kind of chocolate?
Dark chocolate, actually.
How far are we going?
I used to be like 85 to 90%, which was insane. And now I'm like 70 to
Okay.
80.
Is there like a chocolate place you like?
That's a great question. I typically just go with like the Lindt chocolate bars, but I recently went to LA Burdick's. They just opened a location in Brookline, I think. And they had that one down on Clarendon downtown, and I love their stuff. Yeah.
There was a one chocolate place out in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I went to school. It was called a Dancing Lion. I'm not even sure it's still
Oh my
there
God.
anymore, but it's owned by this chocolatier. And you go
need to
in, you will
go.
love it.
Yeah.
If it still exists, you should go in.
And I go to New Hampshire often. I like drive through Manchester all the time.
Well,
I
there's
should
only one
stop.
place you should go in Manchester. don't stay for too long. Go to Dancing Lion. It's on the main strip. I went in there. I was in a bad mood. I don't know what it was. It was a while ago. And the guy said, "You like chocolate?" And I was like, "Not really." I was being like, no, that was not a good day. I was being difficult. Of course, I was with my girlfriend at the time, and she was having some good time. You know, she was trying some different chocolate, and he said, "Hey, would you like to try this chocolate ice cream that I made? I got these beans from Vietnam, and I had these spices, and it's a spicy chocolate ice cream." And you taste it, and it gives you a little zing at the throat, and then it goes away.
Whoa.
And I had it, and it was the most interesting food I ever had. And that guy just goes and experiments, and his passion
That is
drew me
so
out of my
cool.
mood. I was just at the end of it, I'm like talking to him, I'm smiling, and I'm like, I have never had an experience in which I went to a place in a bad mood, and fruit chocolate just
Chocolate
completely
helps with that.
switched it around completely, 100%.
Yeah. Well, I think it also has something to do with when people really love what they do and they're passionate about it and excited, it can change your mood too.
Absolutely, and that's why we do this podcast, just to bring people such as yourself who's just passionate about helping people in your very specific ways.
Yeah. No, I
Okay.
love it.
Right. So, where can people find you?
Yes, I have a website. So my business in private practice, sorry, we didn't talk too much about that, but I see people in private practice. It's called Truly Fueled Nutrition Counseling. So you can find me at trulyfuelednutrition.com, and I have an Instagram that is a lot more geared towards like active people and athletes, but I think it's good information for anybody, called Truly Fueled Nutrition Counseling. Or you can just search me. I'm under Casey Stockmon, just a K and a C on Instagram. And you can email me too, Kathryn at trulyfuelednutrition.com.
We will put all the information into the show notes so you guys don't have to remember everything that Kathryn just said.
Yes,
Okay?
yeah, reach out anytime. I love emails and stuff.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to you and
You
having you on.
too. Thank you so much for having me.